The agenda that I've planned will sort of cover these major points. You know, the first one will just kind of go over a definition of what green purchasing is. You know, what's the definition and why bother. Then we'll look into the very concrete questions that you need to ask yourself when you're looking at trying to make some more green purchases for your business. We'll look at life cycle analysis, extended producer responsibility. You know, as I was listening to Eric this morning, and you know, his bringing up some of these different aspects, and then the first section, you know, I realized that obviously you're going to be getting some repetition between these different sessions. But hopefully, you know, it's just kind of reinforcing some of these ideas and giving you some different examples that you can use as models. We'll also talk about different green material use practices. So once you've made these purchases, its own title, you know, in a purchase that is taking environmental considerations into account. Yes.
Hey, can I just add? I would also add like how they treat their employees. Like, what are the working conditions? How are employees compensated? Are they given breaks? Things like that.
Exactly. Yeah, and that's something that is not included in all definitions, but it's something that I sort of added to the definition that I found because I feel like that's important as well. You know, it doesn't do you any good to buy something that maybe they've taken all these steps to be very green, but if they're, you know, keeping their employees in you know, dormitories and working 36 hours, that's not a human-friendly, planet-friendly sort of environment. How many organizations out there have a green purchasing policy or environmentally preferable purchasing policy in place? Raise of hands. Okay, interesting, good. I'm glad that we have some folks in the audience that, you know, already have a policy, and, you know, hopefully if you have points to add, possibly at the end during the question period, it'd be great to hear from you. So what is green purchasing? This is a definition that I found on the EPA website, which I thought was pretty good. Products or services that have a lesser or reduced effect on human health and the environment. So that does sort of address the social piece, but I added a little bit towards the end. You'll see that hits that a little stronger. Reduced effect on human health and the environment when compared with competing products or services that serve the same purpose. So what, you know, a lot of people will look at a green purchase, or they're not very familiar with the concept. They'll think of it just sort of as how that product is used and the kind of impact that product has during its useful life once you've purchased it, and then maybe during disposal. But when you're looking at a product of purchase, in most green purchasing tries to look at the entire life cycle of that product. So looking at the raw materials that are used to produce the product, the manufacturing process, the packaging of the product, distribution, use, and reuse, and it's obviously also during its operation, maintenance, and disposal. So it's the entire lifetime of that product. And then this component that Jackie brought up, this social responsibility component, I think is important as well. Corporate social responsibility considerations should take into account the entire life cycle, including labor rights, human rights, and community involvement. So I think a good example that's been in the news lately is, and I hate to call out Apple, they do some very good things, and I think generally some of their environmental policies are spot on, but in the news, there was an NPR piece recently about the factories in China that are used to produce their products and the labor conditions of those workers in China, where they're you know, living in tiny little dorms that are barely better than cages. They're worked you know, crazy 36-hour schedules under horrible conditions and not compensated for this sort of work. So, you know, if you want to set up a good green purchasing policy, you need to look at a whole variety of these factors. So why do we develop a green purchasing program? You know, obviously the easy answer is if you have some sort of sustainability goals, this seems like a logical thing to do. But if you're an employee of a program, sometimes, and that signatory of an organization, and that organization may not have a separate sort of environmental mission, you might have to sort of sell this idea to the owners of the company or your managers. And so different points that you can bring up to try to sell the green purchasing program if the environmental argument isn't enough. Improved worker safety and health. You know, obviously if you're purchasing the materials that your workers are using are not toxic, they're safe for the environment, they're safe for the workers who are using them, then obviously you're not going to have as many issues around worker health and safety, reduced liability therefore, reduced health and disposal costs. If you're not using toxic chemicals or toxic materials, then you don't have to pay to have them disposed of especially. Increased availability of environmentally preferable products in the marketplace. You know, this isn't something that, you know, is the primary goal of every business out there, but if you're thinking about closing the loop and making it cheaper for everyone to buy these products, if you're recycling, I'm sorry, I'm kind of working through my own loop here. If you have a recycling program in your business, we need a market for those recyclables. If we don't buy the products that are made out of those recyclables, then we're not closing that loop. In 2008, President Obama signed a new environmentally preferable purchasing program into the federal government. And so obviously, you know, with the money that the federal government spends, they're doing their part, or they're making a serious effort to do their part in bringing down the cost of these different products. So if the rest of our businesses can get on board, it makes it cheaper and more available for the rest of us. And obviously improved ability to meet any environmental goals. So if your business has certain objectives or goals around sustainability that they set out, this should be one of them. So factors to consider. There are any number, if you go on the web and you type in environmentally preferable purchasing policy or green purchasing policy, you know, there are a good number that pop up. This one I have taken and adapted from the University of Utah. I thought they had a very, you know, well-written policy. I tweaked a couple points here and there, but they've got a great policy. And these are questions that, you know, who's ever in the purchasing department, or if you're a tiny little organization and, you know, various people might make these purchases, these are different factors that you need to consider. You know, the first one, is the product energy efficient in production and use? Obviously applies to any number of different materials. Does it have a high recycled post-consumer content? Bridget touched on the difference between post-consumer and post-industrial, and we try to focus people on post-consumer. That means, you know, once you've purchased something and it has reached the end of its useful life and then has been recycled, that's obviously a better and higher use than something that's recycled off of the factory floor, that's some sort of a scrap, which they should be reusing anyway. And we'll talk about that again in greenwashing. It's not a bad thing to do, but it shouldn't be evaluated on the same level as post-consumer content. Is the product reusable, refillable, repairable? You know, one of the most important rules of green purchasing is avoiding disposables, avoiding one-use items, if at all possible. So, you know, if your toner cartridge, can you buy a toner cartridge that can be refilled, or something that can be repaired? You know, in my bio, you notice that I worked overseas for 10 years in developing world countries, and you know, the irony is that in some ways they're so much better able, and you know, their systems for reusing and repairing are so much more effective and widespread than ours are here. You know, when we first moved back to the States, my husband's, the soles of his shoes had kind of worn through, so I thought, oh, I got to take it to a shoe repair place and have it resoled. And the irony was that it took me forever, to find a place that would resole shoes, and then it actually would cost me more to resole the shoe than it would to buy a new pair, which I think, you know, is a sad commentary on our society. You know, in a lot of places overseas, you know, you got a little shoe repair guy in every corner, and it'll, you know, cost you a couple bucks to sew a new sole on your shoe. But anyway, repairable is good. You know, in our disposable society where people are, you know, buying a new cell phone every 6 months or new electronics, that's something to think about. Does the product have less recyclable or biodegradable packaging? You know, it's another one of those things where, you know, I go to Costco and I look, sometimes they'll have organic produce and I'll say, wow, you know, that's a great price on organic apples, but I can't stomach the fact that they're in those plastic bubble containers that A, I do bodily harm to myself in opening, and B, you know, that amount of packaging is just alarming and shouldn't be tolerated. So at any rate, looking at your packaging, you know, can you buy something that's not, you know, individual single serving wraps? Can you buy something in bulk? We've got some great stores in Salt Lake. You know, a number of our grocery stores have great bulk sections. And then, you know, Earth Goods General is a small store that sells a lot of body care products in bulk that you can bring in your own container and fill it up. Other factors to consider: was the product produced locally or regionally? You know, again, you can go to Costco, they've got these great cheap organic apples, but, you know, were they shipped in from Mexico? Where were they, you know, Utah's a great apple producing state, Colorado's a great apple producing state. We really need to ship our apples from New Zealand. So again, supporting local companies or regional if at all possible. That's another sort of concept from overseas that, you know, I think Americans need to learn is, in a lot of these developing world countries, you go to the market and, you know, all of the produce has been trucked in from surrounding towns and villages. You know, obviously they don't have the funds to, you know, transport things from across the continents. And so every meal is local and regional and seasonal, you know, whereas that's kind of the boutique hip thing to do now in restaurants in Salt Lake and around our country. You know, obviously in the developing world, that's the only choice you have for the most part. But it also happens to be the most environmentally friendly choice. You know, obviously this is sort of a no-brainer. Is the product non-toxic or minimally toxic, preferably biodegradable? You know, it obviously depends on what kind of an industry that you work in. You know, in certain industries it's hard to avoid using particular chemicals, but in comparing the choices, you know, what's the least toxic choice that you can make? Will the product last? Is it durable? You know, again, avoiding any sort of one-use product or any sort of disposable. Can it be recycled? And if not, can it be disposed of safely? And again, this is where, you know, to your manager, you can make the argument that, you know, if we buy something that's durable, you know, maybe the upfront cost is more expensive, but if it lasts so much longer, you know, frequently there can be significant cost savings over time. Last two issues: is the product made from raw materials obtained in an environmentally sound and sustainable manner? You know, are we blasting the tops off of mountains in order to get this product, or are we causing major air pollution to get this product? Is there an alternative that doesn't have these sorts of environmental costs? And then obviously throughout its lifetime, manufacturing, use, and disposal. So these are the primary factors that you need to look at. You know, and when you know, when I read out all of these different questions, obviously it seems like, wow, I'm buying a paperclip. Do I have to, you know, how much time am I going to spend answering all these questions when I'm buying a paperclip? And the fortunate thing is that there are a lot of tools out there. There are a lot of businesses or companies that have stepped up and they've done the research for us so that we don't have to, you know, do extensive research on each and every product in order to make a decision that we feel comfortable with or that our company has deemed is reasonable. So two things I wanted to touch on, and this is again something that Eric brought up in his session, is sort of life cycle analysis and extended producer responsibility. So when we were talking earlier about looking at a product from the standpoint of production, manufacturing, material extraction, to assembly and then disposal. This is called the life cycle analysis. And frequently, this concerns the consumer less than it would a company that is actually obviously producing something. This is sort of what we're hoping that a responsible company is doing in the research and design process. That they're looking at the entire life cycle of their product and looking at all the different options and saying, okay, where can we extract materials? Where can we, or how can we extract materials in a more environmentally friendly manner? And hopefully, a responsible company is making these choices based on what is least harmful to both to the environment and the humans that live in that environment or that community. And as Eric was mentioning earlier, extended producer responsibility is once again trying to push that responsibility back up to the producers so that it's not the communities, it's not the taxpayer that is paying the cost for disposing of an item or dealing with a product that has been irresponsibly designed. It's shifting the legal, financial, and environmental responsibility for the materials entering the waste stream back to the manufacturer. And we're seeing progress. This is a movement that's been going on for a while, and we are seeing progress. You'll see in the electronics manufacturing industry that in a good number of states, the electronics manufacturers are now paying for the cost of recycling those electronics once they meet the end of their useful life. Unfortunately, I think it's been 2 legislative sessions that it's been voted down in our fine state of Utah, but maybe third time's the charm, and we can get our legislators to support having manufacturers pay for those costs instead of having taxpayers pay for those costs. But we're hoping, and the idea is that if manufacturers are having to pay for the cost of recycling materials at the end of their useful life, that they're thinking about, during the production process, wow, if at the end of its useful life it's easily disassembled into easily recycled materials and maybe materials that have greater value at the end of the useful life of that product, and organic materials that can be composted, that is going to enter into the design phase and make for a much more environmentally friendly product. I don't know, this graph might be a little hard to read, but I like it because I think people are really used to they're used to the triangle of reduce, reuse, and recycle, this sort of bottom red triangle of what are the best ways to dispose of something once it's reached the end of its useful life or for that particular consumer. But this diagram uses, it looks at the entire life cycle of a product and starts out, at the manufacturer and looking at design of the entire product, design of the packaging, manufacturing process, distribution, use, and then that point where the 2 triangles meet obviously is where the consumer takes over, and then the choices that consumer can make in terms of reducing, reusing, repairing, repurposing, recycling, downcycling, which for those of you who might not be familiar with that term, that's when you're recycling something where the material loses some of the integrity. So if you're talking about glass is something that can be recycled again and again, and it doesn't lose any integrity. You can make a bottle that's just as strong and serves the same purpose as the bottle before it. Whereas many plastics, when they're recycled, you're not able to make them into the same sorts of materials. So plastics are downcycled maybe from milk bottles into fleece jackets, but further down they have fewer uses. So one more reason to avoid purchasing those types of materials if possible. Energy recovery, and we had a long discussion earlier about this in Eric Lombardi's, I think that's a reference to, certain waste to energy, which in a lot of the zero waste arguments is not considered a good alternative. And then, obviously, the last option is disposing of the material. So, sort of taking this again back to the consumer, since most of you are probably not in the product design field, I just wanted to kind of touch on those so you're aware of what's going on and what are some decisions that companies that are manufacturing should be making. But taking it back to the consumer, and once you've purchased this material, or again, if you are coming up with a green purchasing policy, what we like to recommend to our clients is that it's not just about purchasing. It shouldn't just stop with purchasing. Your green purchasing policy should list the different factors that should be considered when making purchases, but it should also include factors or ways that materials need to be used in your organization. I was just in Jackie's session ahead of this, and it was neat to hear her talking about some of the different methods that they use in their company, Regions Blue Cross and Blue Shield, for reusing, that they're encouraging their employees to make. And some of them are super easy, and most of them cost absolutely nothing or will result in cost savings. So again, when you're selling your green purchasing program to your company owner or manager, these are great things to bring up. Reducing any chance possible, printing on double-sided paper. My husband was laughing at me because I printed out a copy of my PowerPoint presentation so I could write some little notes on it, and I printed it on the back of my son's, kindergarten homework assignments, and said, yeah, I don't know if you really want to hold that up and have some questions about you, but it's something he seems to do a lot of homework, unfortunately, on one-sided pages, but it supplies us with free paper for when we do need to do some in-house printing. Using scrap paper, like the one-sided paper, or half pieces of paper, corners of paper. In most companies, I would say there's probably no reason to buy note paper. That any company is going to produce scraps of paper where there's some page free where you can take notes if that's something that you need to do. Using bulletin boards or posting information electronically rather than, ever printing out sheets of paper and giving them to employees. Obviously this isn't possible in every sort of situation, but, whenever possible, doing things electronically rather than printing them out. Reusing, of course, seems like a no-brainer, but we have gone into companies and talked to them about, recycling practices and then noticed that, here they are receiving a number of goods in cardboard boxes, and then they're buying cardboard boxes to ship certain things out. You say, you know what? You could probably save a good amount of money if you just reuse those boxes that that are coming in, but maybe the shipping and the receiving departments are entirely separate, and somehow, there was a big communication gap. But, obviously that's a super easy and cost-effective, cost-saving measure that any organization can take. And reusing packaging materials. We have a number of businesses that receive things with those little styrofoam packing peanuts. And, if you can't convince who's ever shipping you to, use something a little more friendly, the least thing you can do is reuse them if you do have a shipping component of your business. Or, there are any number of post offices that are happy to, take bags of clean styrofoam peanuts and reuse those for their own purposes. Again, repurposing, rethink, refill, repair. Once again, easy, cost-saving methods. And then donating and purchasing. This is something, again, that Jackie touched on, and it's something that we recommend all of our clients take part in. We've got a couple of great resources in Salt Lake. I'm less familiar with what's available here in Ogden. We've got a Restore, which takes a lot of construction type materials or building materials. So if you're doing a remodel and you've got countertops, you've got sinks, you've got pipe, you've got fixtures, they take all those materials, and if they don't sell them, they use them in their Habitat for Humanity homes that they're building, so you're supporting a good cause. We've got any number of office supply stores that will take used office furniture, cubicles, and then sell those, refurbish those, and sell those again. So you can convince rather than paying money to send it to the landfill, you can send it to these different places. Frequently they'll either pay you for it or you'll get a tax write-off for your company. Another option that was mentioned is using nonprofit organizations. The Utah Association of Nonprofits is another great organization in town and a resource that you can tell them what you have, call them up, and they might be able to recommend an organization that could use those materials rather than sending them to the landfill. And of course, we all know Utah schools are desperate for resources, so that's another great option. Another thing I wanted to talk on or address and mention was avoiding greenwashing. And again, this addresses the issue of not having to do as much homework. Nobody has the time to spend 3 hours researching where the most environmentally friendly paperclip comes from. So, when I was doing some research online, and so there are over 300 eco-labeling and certification programs. Some of these more legit than others. But a good place to start if you're looking for some resources online and trying to find out which are the best brands, which are the companies that are taking responsibility for their product for its entire life. The U.S. Green Building Council, many of you might be familiar with the Leadership in Energy and Environmental Design program for building construction, but they have sort of an approved list of different kind of eco-labels that are generally well vetted, and here's a sort of partial list of some of those. And the great thing is that a lot of these you can go on the website. Eco-logo is a whole variety of different products, and a lot of these have searchable programs. So you can go in and you can type in, carpet, which kind of carpet manufacturers have low toxicity, and maybe you can replace a single panel or whatever factors you're looking for, and they can bring up different brands of carpets, and so you're able to compare which are some that have already been vetted. Electronic product environmental assessment tool, obviously for electronics, Energy Star for appliances, Forest Stewardship Council for paper products, and then Green Seal frequently for cleaning and other types of products. The other thing too, that I think if you haven't done the research and you're there in the aisles looking, there are things that you can look for and things that you want to avoid. I laugh when I go to the grocery store and I see labels that say all natural, and I think, what does that really mean? That all natural chicken was I thinking I was buying some like synthetically produced chicken? Yeah, in theory it all starts in a natural place, but if it doesn't have a particular certification, it doesn't list what that means, it doesn't sort of back up that information, then I try to ignore those types of labels. Next thing I wanted to mention is, so you've decided you want to start this green purchasing process. So how do you make sure that this influences every purchase in your organization? And then once a product has been purchased, how it's used and then handled when it's reached the end of its useful life. And so, and this again is something that you're going to hear in a lot of these sessions. Format. I think I meant forming. Interesting. Forming a green team is an important component, and one of the first components that I recommend to our clients. And frequently, it's looking around your company and seeing who are the green folk, the people who get excited about recycling, you know, the people who are taking recycling home before, you know, you had something in place, or that bring their coffee grounds home or collect everybody's coffee grounds. Who are the people who are excited? Bring those people together. It's great if you can get someone from each department so you get a perspective of how things work in each department and make sure that you're examining every aspect of what your business does. It's not always possible though. Bringing these people together to evaluate, you know, what are the materials that you're purchasing on a regular basis. Establishing concrete goals. Jack had some great points about goals, making them time sensitive, making them measurable. In the industry I used to work in, we used to talk about objectively identifiable indicators. So, you know, if someone else looks at these same goals, are they going to be evaluating them in the same way? So that means when you're writing those goals, you know, put them within a particular time frame, make them very concrete, and usually, you know, you need to start with some sort of a baseline. So if you're talking about waste reduction, you know, you need to figure out where you are, where you're starting, and where you're going. And it's in terms of green purchasing. Again, assigning numbers or percentages of recycled content, or, you know, these are ways that make it more concrete and easy for someone to come in and say, okay, you know, this is something we've achieved, this is something we haven't reached that concrete goal. And then again, developing and disseminating the policy. It doesn't do any good if this is something that only exists on the books. You need to make sure that everyone in the organization who is purchasing products and then again using these products is aware. So we try to tell people, you know, include it in the employee manual, make it part of the job description. You know, if they think, you know, we come into companies and talk to different folks, and some people say, oh, well, you know, we've got these hyper green people in our department and they just deal with it. And obviously, some organizations have gone so far as to print up sort of a sustainability policy, and part of the hiring packet contains that sustainability policy, and they need to read and sign that just to acknowledge that they will, you know, help the company achieve these goals, and they know what's expected of them. And then another important component is evaluating and reviewing regularly. You know, any company is going to be evolving over time and shifting what they purchase, and, you know, obviously your budget changes, and that can to make sure that you're still on course towards achieving your overall objectives. This is something I just want to briefly touch on, just because we get a lot of questions about this. We work with a good number of hotels and restaurants, and, you know, this is always a question of, you know, what's the best option, or what's the best of the unfortunate options that are out there if we do have to use a disposable option. And the interesting thing is that there's some organizations that, you know, we've sat down, we've talked through the different options, and they've gone for the durable. They've said, you know what, we look at the impact of what purchasing disposable materials has on the environment, and we don't want to go there. So there might be more of a slightly higher capital expense in purchasing durable goods for the break room, or purchasing a set of, you know, of ceramic or plastic reusable plates for company events. And obviously there's some labor involved in cleaning those, but it's worth it. And the reality is that over time, you end up saving money. You know, if you're buying disposable utensils and plates and napkins for every single employee event, you know, and you look at the cost of that over a year's time, and you have a considerable number of employees, that's a pretty big expense, and you're paying to have those materials hauled away. So one of our big clients, Harmon's, which is a local grocery store, made the commitment to have durable goods in their break rooms. They installed dishwashers in each of their break rooms, and are using, you know, stainless steel utensils and ceramic plates. And, they said in the beginning there was a little resistance, and there were concerns about, is there just going to be a big old stack of dishes in the sink? But, over the several months it took them to introduce the program, they've managed to work out the kinks and responsibility of who's in charge of cleaning up and whatnot. So it can be done. I know it doesn't work for everyone, but obviously durable goods is the best choice if you can make it. Another option, sugarcane-based products. They're actually made from a byproduct, I believe, in the sugar extraction process. So the fact that they're using sort of this secondary waste stream is kind of exciting. Of course, when we live in Utah, there's no local sugarcane, so we are importing these materials from a tropical country which grows sugarcane. So I do have up at our booth a little sheet that walks through these and has all sort of the pros and cons of each of these choices if you want to pick that up later, but I just want to kind of briefly touch on these. Another option is this PLA or corn plastic, polylactic acid. Again, it's something that's biodegradable. Unfortunately, in our local market, we don't have a composting facility that will take it. So in that sense, and this is true of the sugarcane as well, that's unfortunate. And the other unfortunate aspect is that a number of these biodegradable disposables, they also will only decompose or biodegrade in an industrial composting setting. It's hard to get your home composting pile to a high enough temperature, long enough to biodegrade some of these things. So, we talk to certain companies that say, oh, well, I'll just take it all home and compost it in my own compost bin, but that doesn't always work. You need to read the label carefully and make sure that it's something that will biodegrade easily. Paper products, again, is another option. Some of them can be recycled. Again, looking for, if you do have to buy paper, buy it with a high post-consumer recycled content. Plastic with a recycled content, again, recyclable, but it is a petroleum-based product. They're the political and economic issues related with anything made out of petroleum. And then styrofoam is the one that we never recommend, and we try to dissuade all of our clients from using. The unfortunate thing is that, of course, it's the lightest and it's the cheapest, but it's most harmful generally for our health and the environment. So again, if you have any more questions about the responsible disposables, I'd be happy to talk to you and show you our sort of info sheet, looking at those if those are issues that are of concern to you. And I'm sure you can't really see any of those links since it's kind of light, but at any rate, Francis said that these would be on the website, so you can look for the links there. But I found a number of different resources that can be useful if you want to look any further or find different models or templates of purchasing policies, environmentally friendly purchasing policies. StopWaste.org had some good ones. ResponsiblePurchasing.org had a lot of neat calculators that you could plug in a different type of product, and then it would do this little sort of comparison for you and look at all the indirect and direct costs and inputs and outputs and impacts of these so that you were better able to compare those. Greenstandard.org had some other good purchasing resources, and then again, StopWaste.org had some another example of various factors to look at when you're purchasing. That's pretty much what I had for today. It looks like we might have a little bit of time for questions.
I just wonder if you do any specific industry standards that pertain to this, like bursting flow. You could be like, hey, if I see this seal of approval on a product, I know that they're following these guidelines.
The EPA has a whole database of what they have determined is the acceptable or acceptable items for federal purchasing and for folks who use federal government grants and monies. So the EPA is one place to look, and then and they recommend various recycled content. And then again, you know, if you go to the U.S. Green Building Council, they have, you know, a list of some of these labels. And it, you know, I think it is hard to navigate, but for every organization, it's going to be different. Not every organization can pay. Sometimes it's more expensive to buy different materials, so you have to make a decision that's, you know, within your own budget as well. But you know, the list that I provided under avoiding greenwashing, you know, the eco logo, Energy Star, Forest Stewardship Council, those are generally well regarded sort of eco labels. You know, there's USDA Organic, which a lot of people feel is kind of wimpy and sad, and then there's Oregon Tilt, which is a, you know, more stringent organic. So it varies obviously on what you're purchasing. Eric.
I just want to mention there is one stamp in this country for biodegradable material for composting, which is where most of the confusion comes up, and it's the EPI, Biodegradable Products Institute, and they go by the ASTM 6400 standard. So we push coast to coast EPI. Right now, they are the leading certifier for and then volunteer other stuff.
And do they indicate on that label, you know, whether something is compostable in a home composting versus industrial composting setting, or is it?
No, it's not a definition. ASTM 6400 is actually the standard, and this stuff generally doesn't break down in the backyard composting plant. But this is what you want to use for your zero waste events. It's got to be EPI certified.
Okay, thank you. Other questions?
Yeah, I was just wondering about your company, Momentum Recycling. Do you actually recycle things at your location, or do you just take waste streams into which there is a market and then we pass it on?
For the most part, or in currently, we are transporting. Our primary objective is sort of transporting materials from our clients to well-vetted end users in the valley. So our mixed recyclables we take to Rocky Mountain Recycling, which is a local material recovery facility. They sort, bale, and sell off those materials. We take our glass to a local crusher, and then, you know, green waste goes to a local composting facility. So currently we're not processing any of our materials. That's something that's going to be changing. We are building a glass crushing facility this summer, and hopefully that'll be online come July, August. So it's something we're moving in that direction, but we're not there yet.
I think the industry for recycling and that is changing so fast. You go one direction. Is there a good resource to recycling your products and what can be reusable? I mean, you start compacting one waste stream, and then you find out later that it's a valuable commodity to certain recyclers. So
that's a tough one because, you know, what I've found is that, you know, recycling and what makes sense to recycle in one community is very different from another community. You know, it all depends on what resources are available in your community and to what lengths you're able to go to recycle that material. So you might have something that is recyclable, it has recycle symbol on it, but if there isn't someone who can take it in your community and take it somewhere to be recycled, then in effect it's not recyclable in your community, in your location. So unfortunately, you know, it's hard to point to one resource where you're going to find the answer because of, you know, the issues I just mentioned. So, you know, what I find is communicating with the rest of the folks in your industry and, you know, coming to conferences like these. And what we do with our clients frequently is we organize tours with various clients so that there's a sort of cross-fertilization, or, you know, our clients can learn from one another. And maybe one client has found an end use for a particular material that, you know, another client produces as well. Or maybe, you know, the best case scenario obviously is one client's waste is the, resource that another client needs for their production. So communicating and networking and, doing research on the web. There are resources, I think there's a session tomorrow on resource exchanges, and, hopefully, that would be another source. Your last question? Or none? Thank you, folks.